This is True Crime Out Loud.
I'm your host, B.
And I'm your host, Jen.
This week's case takes us to Springfield, Missouri. Springfield is the third largest city in Missouri with a population of about 167,000. And Springfield is the main city of the Springfield metropolitan area, which includes some other surrounding cities. And they have a total population of about 460,000. 15.9% of the residents of Springfield live below the poverty line, and the city is known as the Queen City of the Ozarks. It features 3 universities, and it is also the location of the Springfield 3 case that we covered in episode 7. So if you haven't heard that one yet, check it out too. And the case this week is going to focus on a mother and a daughter. The mother, Claudinia Dee Dee Blanchard, and the daughter, Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Now, Gypsy was born in 1991, and she had numerous health issues from birth. And those included a chromosomal disorder, leukemia, muscular dystrophy. She even had problems eating on her own and had a feeding tube. Gypsy suffered from severe asthma, extreme migraine problems, and hearing and visual impairment. And from birth, she was on numerous medications. Gypsy had the mental capacity of about a 7-year-old. Now, her mother, Claudinia Blanchard, everybody called Dee Dee, she was originally from a small town in Louisiana, but had fled that area from an abusive family with Gypsy. Dee Dee said that Gypsy's father was a deadbeat, alcoholic, drug addict, and that he made fun of Gypsy's disabilities and even called the Special Olympics a freak show. She also said that Gypsy's father never provided any financial support for Gypsy, and they lost everything they owned after Hurricane Katrina. And she said that her father never stepped up to help. On Sunday afternoon, June 14th of 2015, a post appeared on a joint Facebook account. And this Facebook account was Dee Dee's and Gypsy's Facebook account that they had together. And the Facebook posts read, I quote, "The bitch is dead." And friends immediately jumped on this and said that they thought the account had been hacked. And then there was another post that said, and I quote, "I effing slashed that fat pig and raped her sweet innocent daughter. Her scream was so effing loud, LOL." This caused friends of Dee Dee and Gypsy to become very worried. A friend of theirs, Kim Blanchard, who has no relation, just the same last name, lived nearby, and she saw the post and tried to call Dee Dee several times but got no answer. So she and her husband, David, went to Dee Dee's home, and some neighbors were already there, and I guess they had seen the Facebook post as well. And they were trying to look into the home to see if they could determine if Dee Dee and Gypsy were really in any trouble. But there was some protective film on the windows, so it was hard to see inside. They saw Dee Dee's vehicle that she used to transport Gypsy parked in the driveway, and unable to determine their welfare, they called 911. Kim Blanchard, in fact, called 911, and the police arrived for a welfare check. And True Crime Out Loud listeners will realize and remember that many of these cases start with a police welfare check. But in this instance, the police arrive and there's no obvious signs of anything wrong. And the police can't enter the house. They have no indication other than the Facebook post that there's a problem. And they know that Facebook accounts get hacked, and for whatever reason, things are said on Facebook that aren't true. It wouldn't provide enough reason to enter their home. But David Blanchard, who was Kim's husband, again, unrelated to Dee Dee or Gypsy, but family friends, found an unlocked kitchen window and he went inside. He has different rules than the police. So the police leave, he finds an open window and decides to go in. He immediately noticed that it was cold in the home, like the air conditioning had just been set on max and all of the lights were off. He was looking around for signs of anything being damaged or of a possible robbery, but he really didn't see anything like that. No obvious signs of a robbery. What he did see was all three of Gypsy's wheelchairs, and it would be very unusual for her to not be in those wheelchairs. He found Gypsy's room and noted that it seemed in normal condition, and Dee Dee's room was fine except for a large pile of clothes on the bed. He exits the home, and then they update the police, and he tells them that he found nothing out of the way. Well, police are still concerned about the situation, and they decide to get a search warrant. So they're going to petition a judge, tell the judge what reason they have to believe that Dee Dee and Gypsy are in trouble so that they can have a legal reason for the police to enter the home. And they do, in fact, receive that search warrant at about 10:45 p.m. Police enter Gypsy and Dee Dee's home, and they said that the house was messy except for a nicely organized closet full of medications. And having a law enforcement background, we encounter this a lot. We enter a house and it may look messy to us or it may not. If we don't know the people, we don't really know what normal looks like. So it's kind of hard to judge if a home is really messy or if it's just messy to my standards and maybe not the people who live there.
Yeah, I've been in homes before and thought that the home had been burglarized. And then when the residents arrive, they say, no, this is just the way we keep it.
The big discovery is that they find Dee Dee in her bedroom, and she was under that pile of clothes that David saw when he went in the home. He just didn't see her. And she was dead. She was 48 years old, and she had been stabbed to death, and it appeared that she had been dead for a day or two. What they did not find in the house was her daughter, Gypsy Rose. They learned from speaking with neighbors that Gypsy suffers from these numerous health issues, and they're concerned because she's not mobile on her own. She's doesn't go anywhere without a wheelchair and needs constant assistance from a healthy adult. And the neighbors were able to provide this information to the police along with other good information. They tell them that Dee Dee was from the small town in Louisiana, but she was there because of her abusive family. And Dee Dee had told the neighbors that what finally made her leave this abusive family was that Gypsy's grandfather, Dee Dee's own father, had burned Gypsy with cigarettes. The neighbors described them as happy. They said that both of them seemed happy, and they were always together because Gypsy relied on her mother to take care of her. Gypsy was described, as we said, as having the mental capacity of a 7-year-old due to brain damage, but neighbors informed police that she was in fact 19 years old. She had been homeschooled because she was unable to keep up with the other students in the school. Dee Dee had told them that Gypsy had been this way since she was a baby and had spent time in the neonatal intensive care unit and had leukemia as a toddler. So that we can see that the neighbors are just a wealth of information. They're telling this to the police because Dee Dee had shared this with her friends and neighbors. They tell the police that Gypsy loved princess outfits and usually wore wigs or hats because she didn't have hair because of her medical conditions. They described Dee Dee as a loving woman who in the summer would play a movie on a projector outdoors for kids in the neighborhood that couldn't afford to go to movies. And Dee Dee would charge a small fee for concessions, and she used that money for Gypsy's medical treatments.
But the police get a statement from one of the neighbors named Aaliyah Woodmansey, and she had befriended Gypsy. Aaliyah tells the police some things that Gypsy told her in confidence. Aaliyah says that Gypsy had a secret Facebook account under the name Emma Rose. Using this secret identity, Gypsy had joined a Christian dating site where she had met someone named Nicholas. Aaliyah said Dee Dee was very overprotective and had absolutely no idea about the private or secret Facebook account or Nicholas. Gypsy had told Aaliyah that Dee Dee would not approve and would not allow her to date, but she wanted to grow up and have a boyfriend like other girls her age. By digging into this other Facebook account, the police learned that this boyfriend of Gypsy's was Nicholas Godejohn. And the police were able to trace Nicholas's IP address, and they located him at his home in Big Bend, Wisconsin on June 15th. So that's the day after Dee Dee's body was discovered. With Nicholas, they found Gypsy. She was not being held against her will. The sheriff immediately held a press conference, and some of his first words were, and I quote, "Things are not always what they seem," end quote. So they start furthering this investigation and digging up more. And that's what you do in any investigation. You start with a little bit and you kind of pull all the pieces in until it becomes a huge investigation.
Well, and that's because this one has gone from loving mother with special needs daughter who's missing, loving mother murdered, to a lot more complicated than that.
Absolutely. Well, further in the investigation, they discovered that when Gypsy was a baby, Dee Dee had said that Gypsy had sleep apnea, and she wound up sleeping with a CPAP machine. Dee Dee had told Gypsy's father, Rod, that Gypsy had a chromosomal disorder that caused her health issues. At 8 years old, Dee Dee said Gypsy had leukemia and muscular dystrophy. She required a wheelchair because she couldn't walk on her own, a feeding tube because she couldn't eat on her own. She had seizures, asthma, the hearing and visual impairments, the numerous medications. We already talked about all this. But in addition to this, Gypsy had had multiple surgeries, including surgery on her eyes. She had to have surgery to put in a feeding tube. She had to have that changed out often. She had her salivary glands removed. And it even got to the point that Gypsy's teeth had rotted and had to be pulled. Now, this could be due to several things. And I was reading that it could be due to, first, maybe some malnutrition because she's eating through a feeding tube, but also because her salivary glands had been removed. She didn't have that natural function. So she was essentially toothless. Gypsy did not attend school past the second grade. At most, she was about 5 feet tall and very thin. Gypsy wore large glasses that were too big for her small face, and she had very pale skin. Well, Gypsy, in this investigation, once they find her, she tells police it was all a fraud, and Dee Dee made her do it.
So this homicide investigation that the police are conducting into the death of Dee Dee has now led them to Gypsy, who drops this bombshell on them. I don't have all these health problems. My mom made me act like I had these health problems. So the police are going to want to learn more about their victim. And the big thing that they discover is that Gypsy didn't even need a wheelchair. She could walk just fine, and she had no medical issues. None. The leukemia, the chromosomal disorder, the sleep apnea, the muscular dystrophy, all of those things that Dee Dee had told everyone that Gypsy suffered with just weren't there at all. She seemed to be in normal health other than the surgeries and stuff that had been done to her, which really were done. She gave her age as 19, but once her actual birth certificate was presented, it was discovered that she was actually 23. And the kicker to that is that Gypsy didn't know she was 23. She believed that she was 19 based on what her mother had told her. Along with all of the other fraud, they discovered that Dee Dee, who claimed that her legal name was Claudinia Blanchard with an E on the end, was actually Claudine Blanchard with no E on the end. And Dee Dee used various spellings and aliases throughout the years, and she did not work and survived on Social Security, disability checks, food stamps, Medicaid, and child support. Basically government assistance and child support from a man that she had painted to everyone as a deadbeat who didn't do anything to support his daughter. She was from the Golden Meadow area in Lafourche Parish in Louisiana and had 5 siblings. Dee Dee had been in some minor legal trouble for writing bad checks and just little things like that. She never had a great relationship with her family, but it seemed to just kind of get worse. She started doing things like obtaining credit cards in family members' names without them knowing, and her family claimed that she was wanted in several locations throughout Louisiana for writing bad checks. According to the family, she was at times caring for her elderly mother, but really neglected her and didn't feed her like she was supposed to and failed to keep her clean. She met Gypsy's father, Rod, when he was 17, and he was actually still in high school. At this time, Dee Dee was 24. They dated about 4 to 6 months, and then Dee Dee got pregnant, and they got married. Rod woke up on his 18th birthday and realized that he had gotten married for the wrong reasons, and he left Dee Dee. She tried several times to get back together with him, but it didn't work, and Gypsy was born on July 27th, 1991, shortly after Rod and Dee Dee separated. Rod would later say that Dee Dee liked the name Gypsy, and he was a Guns N' Roses fan, so she was named Gypsy Rose. He said that to his knowledge, Gypsy was healthy at birth, but when she was 3 months old, Dee Dee was convinced that she had sleep apnea, and this is when they started taking Gypsy to hospitals. Rod said that the doctors could never find anything wrong, even after several tests with a sleep monitor and everything else. And shortly after this, Dee Dee began to tell Rod that there were many health problems with Gypsy, and they were due to this chromosomal defect. He said that Dee Dee had once worked as a nurse's assistant, and this led him to believe that she knew what she was talking about, and she seemed to have things under control. Rod later remarried and had 2 more children. He was not an abusive husband nor an addict, as Dee Dee would later portray him to neighbors and family friends. In fact, he sent Dee Dee a check for $1,200 every month, even after Gypsy reached the adult age when people would normally quit paying child support. He continued to pay that because of these medical conditions. He knew that Dee Dee was taking care of his very sick daughter, and so he continued to pay the money. Rod and his wife, Christy, were able to see Gypsy for the first few years and up until about 2004. They even went to Special Olympics events with Gypsy. During the time that Gypsy and her dad were together, she never reported anything bad or said anything bad about Dee Dee. Dee Dee and Gypsy ended up moving to Slidell, Louisiana, where they lived in public housing. And Rod said that Dee Dee would keep him up to date on Gypsy's medical treatment and where they were living. Rod said that he and Christy were able to speak to Gypsy often, but were not able to see her. Rod called Gypsy on her 18th birthday, but Dee Dee told Rod that Gypsy didn't know her real birthday and that she was under the impression that she was only 14 years old. So Dee Dee tells Rod, hey, just go along with it. I don't want to upset her by telling her otherwise. Rod said that the very first time he saw Gypsy walking was on the news at her arraignment hearing in Wisconsin. No one during this entire time had told him that she could walk, and he was shocked and confused. I mean, he just had no idea that she could walk, and the situation had gotten so bad with her family and everything that even after her death, none of her family members wanted any of Dee Dee's remains.
Let me give you a little bit more information on Dee Dee and Gypsy. B said that Rod and Christy didn't see Gypsy about after 2004. Well, that was because of the events in 2005. That's when Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana. And if you're not familiar with it, if you're not here in the southern U.S., it was a devastating hurricane. And Dee Dee and Gypsy fled in 2005 because their home was destroyed. So this caused them to move further away from Rod and Christy. They were at a rescue shelter. It was a medical rescue shelter, and a doctor there helped them get flown to Missouri and said that they could, restart their lives there and get the medical treatment they needed. So Dee Dee rented a home for her and Gypsy in Aurora, Missouri. In 2008, Habitat for Humanity built a new home for Dee Dee and Gypsy in Springfield, Missouri. They even gave Dee Dee a car. So in March of 2008, Dee Dee and Gypsy move into this pretty new pink home. The home had a wheelchair ramp for Gypsy and a jacuzzi tub to help with her muscles and aches, and she could sit in. They received benefits from many, many charities. They had trips to concerts, trips to Disney. They even met Miranda Lambert through Make-A-Wish Foundation, free flights to medical appointments and conferences. One neighbor, Amy Pennegar, said she sometimes would drive Dee Dee and Gypsy to the airport for them to go to Kansas City for Gypsy to get medical treatment. And then she would sometimes bring them things from Sam's Club. Amy said she was secretly kind of jealous of Dee Dee and Gypsy and all they got to do. We do know that Dee Dee would take Gypsy to numerous doctors and medical professionals. Testing would usually show inconclusive or contradictory, so Dee Dee would just stop seeing that doctor and find another one. She would stop going to any medical center or any medical profession who even questioned Gypsy's health issues. A lot of medical personnel went along with what Dee Dee wanted because she was able to accurately describe Gypsy's symptoms, and she would even sometimes give Gypsy medications to mimic the conditions that she wanted Gypsy to display before they saw the doctor. For example, she put numbing medication on Gypsy's gums once before they went to the doctor because Dee Dee wanted to convince the doctor that Gypsy had a severe drooling issue and couldn't control her drool. So the numbing medication kept her from feeling it and being able to swallow your saliva as you normally would, and it would run out of her mouth. So for the treatment, the doctors initially tried Botox in her salivary glands, but that didn't seem to work, and Dee Dee would bring her back over and over, and eventually they removed her salivary glands. Everyone said Dee Dee was very sweet and charming, so this would have even worked with medical professionals who are people too. When Gypsy got to where she could talk, Dee Dee would tell her to not talk to the doctor or the medical staff, and Dee Dee would do all the talking. One thing that they saw once they got all of Gypsy's medical records is everything said the mother reported, mother reported. It never said patient said. It was always mother reported. So it was Dee Dee who was providing this information, and Dee Dee who had some medical training. When in public, Dee Dee would always hold Gypsy's hand, and she would squeeze it when she wanted Gypsy to be quiet. Gypsy said she knew that was her signal to kind of stop talking and don't say anything else. Dee Dee took Gypsy to numerous hospitals and said Gypsy would have seizures every few months, so she got her put on seizure medications. She insisted to several doctors that Gypsy had muscular dystrophy, but testing and muscle biopsies showed that she did not. So Dee Dee put her in a wheelchair herself. Dee Dee said Gypsy had poor vision and constant ear infections. This ended up in surgeries for those. When Dee Dee would take Gypsy to doctors, especially once they moved to Missouri, she said most of Gypsy's medical records were missing due to Hurricane Katrina. So this provided a convenient excuse why I can't show you what's wrong with her, but believe me, I'm her mother, this is what's wrong with her. Obviously, it was later discovered that this was not true, but by this time, Gypsy was already in a wheelchair full-time. She had her feeding tube, and she sometimes had to wear oxygen. Well, in 2009, an anonymous call was reported to authorities that they did not feel Gypsy had the medical issues as described by her mother. Now, this resulted in visits from caseworkers to the Blanchard home, but Dee Dee was able to convince everyone that Gypsy had these issues, and they found Gypsy with numerous health issues and nothing wrong in the home. We still don't know who made this anonymous call. When Gypsy was 14, a neurologist that Dee Dee had taken her to began to suspect something wasn't right and even put in his notes it was possibly a case of Munchausen by proxy. But he said later he didn't feel he had enough evidence to report it to the authorities and that he didn't think people would believe him because this is a very rare thing. As Gypsy got older, Dee Dee began to lie about Gypsy's age, not only to medical staff, but as Bea told you earlier, to Gypsy. Dee Dee had altered Gypsy's birth certificate. And so Gypsy, when she saw her birth certificate, she believed, hey, this is the age I am. Dee Dee would not allow Gypsy to go to school, saying that she couldn't keep up with the other kids. But Gypsy was of average intelligence. Dee Dee obviously told people that her mental age was that of 7 and would warn people not to say things to hurt her feelings. Well, Gypsy starts getting older, and she gets into teenage years. And anybody who's raised teenagers or been a teenager knows it gets harder to control someone as they move into those teenage years, and that is what happened in this case. In February of 2011, Gypsy tried to run away with a man she met at some type of science fiction convention that she had actually gone to with Dee Dee. So Gypsy connected with this 35-year-old man online, and she was able to get a ride to meet up with him, and she was going to run away with him. Well, it took Dee Dee about 4 hours to track them down, and Dee Dee told the man that Gypsy was only 15, but Gypsy was actually 19 at this time. After this incident, Dee Dee smashed Gypsy's computer and her phone and even physically restrained her to her bed for about 2 weeks. And she told Gypsy if she ever did this again, that she would harm her. But before long, as teenagers do, Gypsy was back online. Around 2012, when she joined this Christian dating site, she met Nicholas Godejohn, who we said is from Big Bend, Wisconsin.
So Gypsy meets Nicholas online, and Nicholas really kind of expands Gypsy's world. Gypsy's desperate to meet somebody outside of her home, and she meets Nicholas Godejohn. And Nicholas had been diagnosed with autism in elementary school and was in special education classes. His IQ is 82, according to the psychologist who treated him. Nicholas's parents divorced when he was 3 or 4, and he was raised by his mother until he was about 15. In 2013, he pleaded no contest to a disorderly conduct charge that he received for watching pornographic material on his laptop and touching himself inappropriately while at a McDonald's restaurant. He told Gypsy that he had an alternate personality he discovered when he was 18, and he was actually a 500-year-old vampire named Victor. Prior to meeting Gypsy, Nicholas had kept to himself because he had a difficult time making friends, partly because of his awkward social skills. So by the time he arrives in Springfield to murder Dee Dee, he wasn't going to school or working at all. In his home, police found cell phones, computer equipment, bloody clothing, a bag of cash, and an envelope mailed from Springfield. Inside the envelope was a bloody glove and a curved knife with a fixed handle that had about a 6-inch blade on it. The police later discovered that Gypsy was using the internet after Dee Dee went to bed and had carried on an online relationship with Nicholas for about 2.5 years prior to the murder. Nicholas didn't care that Gypsy was in a wheelchair, and they planned to get married even. In 2014, Gypsy discloses to her friend and neighbor, Aaliyah Woodmansey, about Nicholas and how they were going to be together. And she discussed eloping and talked about names for their children. And if you'll remember, Miss Woodmansey is the person that would later tell police that there was something strange going on. It wasn't exactly the way it appeared. Gypsy and Nicholas had several sexual exchanges online that leaned toward BDSM. They both said that they had alternate personalities and they would dress up, and this shocked Aaliyah because she thought that Gypsy was still a minor and had low mental capacity. So she told Gypsy that she didn't need to be continuing this relationship with Nicholas, but she really believed it was more of just kind of a fantasy life for Gypsy, because remember, Dee Dee had told everyone that she was a minor and of limited mental capacity. Dee Dee didn't allow Aaliyah and Gypsy to be alone together very much, and Dee Dee had even told Aaliyah at one point that she believed that Aaliyah was corrupting Gypsy. In March of 2015, Gypsy and Nicholas actually came up with a secret plan to meet in person, and they were going to do it in front of Dee Dee. And their thought process was if Dee Dee was meeting him and she thought that Gypsy was meeting him for the first time, Dee Dee might be more apt to approve of them dating. So the plan was for them to meet at this movie theater, and they did, in fact. But it didn't go the way Gypsy and Nicholas had planned. Dee Dee didn't like him. Gypsy said that Dee Dee got jealous because Gypsy was giving too much attention to Nicholas, and Dee Dee ordered Gypsy to stay away from him. However, Gypsy went to the bathroom, and Nicholas met her in the bathroom, and she claims that that's where she had sex for the first time in her life, was in that movie theater bathroom stall. This failed plan of Dee Dee meeting Nicholas and everything caused a heated argument between Dee Dee and Gypsy that lasted a few weeks and, got pretty tumultuous at times with yelling and throwing stuff, and Dee Dee calling Gypsy vulgar names. And Gypsy would later say that it was at this point she came up with a new plan to escape from Dee Dee. She told Nicholas what Dee Dee was doing and asked him to kill Dee Dee so that they could be together. Gypsy said it wasn't because she hated Dee Dee, but that would be the only way to get away from her. And they discussed this for some time, and at one point he talked to her about murdering and raping Dee Dee, but Gypsy made a deal with him that he could rape her instead. So in June of 2015, Nick Godejohn came to Missouri and checked into a motel. He waited for Gypsy to text him and tell him that Dee Dee was asleep on June 13th. Nicholas went to the home, and Gypsy provided him with a knife. Nicholas stabbed Dee Dee while Gypsy waited in the bathroom with her ears covered. Gypsy would later say that she didn't think that Nicholas would actually go through with it, but he did. She heard Dee Dee screaming and said that it was more of a startled scream and yelled asking who was in the bedroom. She also said that she called out to Gypsy 3 or 4 times. Gypsy would later report to police that she wanted to go help Dee Dee but was frozen in fear and afraid to get up, and then everything went quiet. After the murder, Gypsy and Nicholas stayed the night in the motel room where Nicholas had come to carry out this act, and then boarded a bus and went to Nicholas's home in Big Bend on June 14th. But before leaving Springfield, they mailed the murder weapon, this knife that was used to kill Dee Dee, to Nicholas's home, and they took about $4,000 from Dee Dee's savings. And it was that afternoon that the messages started appearing on Facebook. Gypsy said that she got Nicholas to post the messages on the joint Facebook account with her mother because she wanted someone to find her mother's body. And as we said before, Aaliyah tells the police about this relationship between Gypsy and Nicholas, and that's how they were able to obtain his IP address from Facebook, which led them back to Wisconsin to find them. On June 15th, 2015, both Gypsy and Nicholas were taken into custody in Wisconsin, and they were both extradited back to Missouri on a $1 million bond.
It's at this point I want to discuss a little bit of the why, and not that I have answers or B has answers, but it's just kind of more some food for thought and some things that we've read. People questioned many things, but mainly the question was, why didn't Gypsy just get up and walk away? Well, Gypsy said she was afraid of her mother and didn't know what she might do, and Gypsy felt she had no one she could trust. Gypsy was conditioned that no one would believe her, and Dee Dee conditioned her this way so that she wouldn't leave. Gypsy had never been allowed to leave the house without her mother, so if she left, where would she go and what would she do? Gypsy later discloses that Dee Dee would sometimes hit her and deny her food, and it was more than the medical treatments as abuse. It was actually physical abuse.
So earlier, Jen mentioned that this neurologist believed that it may be a case of Munchausen by proxy. And for those that aren't familiar with the term Munchausen by proxy, we'll get into it a little further. Dr. Mark Feldman, who's an expert in Munchausen, said that the control is similar to a kidnap victim. So basically, Gypsy is a hostage with Dee Dee as her abductor. And Munchausen syndrome was first identified in 1951 by Richard Asher, a British psychiatrist. So in 1977, Roy Meadow identifies Munchausen by proxy, and that's a distinction from Munchausen. And in 1980, it was listed in the DSM as a disorder. And for those who aren't familiar with the DSM, it's kind of like the Bible for mental health disorders. It stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And according to the DSM-5, which is the latest version of the DSM, it is called fictitious disorder and fictitious disorder imposed on another, or FDIA. And that's what we're going to focus on, because that distinguishes between a disorder for attention or malingering where it is faked for material benefit. And both of these disorders, fictitious disorder and fictitious disorder imposed on another, I know it's getting kind of confusing, are strange mental illnesses, and doctors don't know what caused it, and there aren't any real successful treatments for it. But this case is an example of fictitious disorder imposed on another. And this disorder is marked by attention-seeking behavior by a caregiver. Like we said, it's rare, and the caregiver is usually the mother of the victim. They gain attention by getting medical help for non-existent or exaggerated symptoms in their child. A lot of times the caregivers will purposely make the symptoms worse. Most of the time, it's not for material gain. Even though Dee Dee definitely saw some material gain, it's usually just for attention. The perpetrators of this often appear caring and distraught over the child's medical issues. They lie about symptoms, alter test results with contaminants, falsify medical records, induce symptoms by doing some pretty horrible things like poisoning or suffocation or starving or causing infection. They basically cause people who aren't sick to be sick. And these worsening symptoms are reported by the caregiver, but they're almost never witnessed by others. And the conditions and symptoms don't line up with tests and results. And we see this in Dee Dee and Gypsy's case, where a lot of the medical professionals that she goes to they're unable to find causes for what she's reporting. Conditions get better in the hospital, and that's generally due to observation by medical personnel. But after the person goes home, the conditions return or even get worse. Blood in lab samples may not match the blood of the child, so the caregiver may sneak blood in that's not even the blood of the child. And a lot of times there are signs of chemicals in the child's blood, stool, or urine. It's difficult to diagnose because the information comes from dishonesty from the caregiver. Treatment is difficult because those with FDIA usually continue to deny that they have it, and they're so adept at lying, and treatment depends on telling the truth, and they usually have a hard time telling a truth from lies. There's no real reliable statistics on FDIA because so many cases go undetected and it's difficult to treat. FDIA is considered child abuse, though, within legal realms, because obviously these people are taking steps to harm their kid, like suffocation or poisoning or any of those things that I mentioned before.
Well, like I said, we wanted to discuss some of the why, and going over that, I think, helps us see the why of Gypsy wanted out of this situation, not necessarily why she wanted her mother dead, but why she felt the urge and the need to get out of this situation. Gypsy said it was after her mother's death before she found out the extent of Dee Dee's lies and her manipulation. Gypsy said she knew all along that she could walk and she could eat regular food, but truly believed that she had had leukemia. She said Dee Dee would regularly shave Gypsy's head, and tell her that it was going to fall out anyway, so they were just going to shave it to keep it nice and neat. Gypsy said the only thing medically wrong with her was she sometimes had a lazy eye, but, she wore glasses and that helped with it, and she has better vision in her left eye than she does in her right eye. She didn't question Dee Dee or the things that she said or did because she didn't want to upset her mom or to hurt her feelings. Gypsy was quoted as saying, "I think she would have been the perfect mom for someone that was actually sick, but I'm not sick," end quote. She said the line between right and wrong was so blurred for her mother, which made it blurred for her. She said that's just the way she was taught and the way she grew up, and she didn't realize that it was abuse. She was raised to do what her mother taught her to do, and those things are not very good things. She taught her to lie, and she didn't want to lie, but she did what she was told. Now, Gypsy's defense attorney goes to get Gypsy's medical records, but he had a hard time doing this because Dee Dee had gotten power of attorney over Gypsy once Gypsy became an adult. He finally got medical records, and he talked with the prosecution, and they discussed a plea deal. So in July of 2016, Gypsy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Now, she will be eligible for parole in early 2024. The prosecution said they agreed to a plea deal because they did not feel it would be fair to seek first-degree murder with a life sentence due to the abuse Gypsy suffered at the hands of Dee Dee. In 2018, Nicholas Godejohn was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. And Gypsy even testified it was her idea and her plan to kill her mother. The sad part is Gypsy says that she has much more freedom in prison than she ever did with her mother. Gypsy's gained weight in prison. In fact, in the 1 year that she was in jail awaiting her trial, she gained 14 pounds. She sees a therapist regularly and stays in touch with her father and her stepmother and has been able to build a relationship with them. Now, in April of 2019, it was reported that Gypsy got engaged to a man named Ken who had been a pen pal, and she's decided at this point she's going to keep her life private and out of the media. The plan was for her and Ken to get married once she was released from prison, but then I saw reports later in 2019 that said the engagement was off. But with Gypsy wanting to keep her life private, we really don't know much past that. So, B, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's certainly a unique case, and I don't believe that what Dee Dee did to Gypsy absolves her of responsibility for planning the murder of her mother. But I do feel like that the prosecutors and the defense attorneys in this case did a good job of determining a fair punishment for Gypsy. I do believe that Gypsy planned and helped execute this murder, and that there is certainly a penalty to pay for that. But it is undeniable that her upbringing played a role in that, and there's certainly a mitigating factor. Just sad case.
Oh, absolutely. And I agree with you on that. But when we were talking about the factitious disorder imposed on another, it said most of the time people do it for the attention. I feel like in this case that maybe Dee Dee, that's where she started because Rod had left her. Oh, Gypsy has sleep apnea. Oh, Gypsy has this. And she's wanting that attention from him and from other people. But then it kind of turned into a way of life and a financial gain because she would do like fundraisers to raise money for Gypsy's medical treatment. Like our modern day GoFundMes, she was doing those to raise money for medical treatment that Gypsy didn't even need. And she had $4,000 in savings in cash in her house and was living on government assistance. I mean, that tells me that at some point that changed, or it could have been for that reason all along. I don't know, but I do believe that this woman had some serious issues.
Sure, and I agree that there certainly are financial aspects to it because she benefited from Gypsy's perceived medical conditions. Habitat for Humanity provided them a home and a car, and programs that are designed for sick children, like the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I mean, they basically profited from those foundations because of these perceived illnesses. I mean, the trip to meet Miranda Lambert and all of those things, they have value. And so there is certainly a monetary gain there. I don't know that I'm like you. I don't know that it started out that way, because it probably took a while. Really, the displacement at Hurricane Katrina seems to be what got that ball rolling, because
she was in a wheelchair and feeding tube all before that.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying the financial aspect of it tended to begin there because they're displaced from their home, and the doctor hears, you got this doctor who sees them and goes, "Oh no, I mean, they've been displaced from their home." And that kind of gets that for me personally, it appears that's when the financial aspect became much more important than the attention aspect.
I mean, with Habitat for Humanity getting a free house, I mean, the house was built and given to her. A car was given to her. Trips to Disney. And I mean, it's been nearly 10 years since I went to Disney, and I know that's several $1,000s. I mean, it's all this stuff that she's getting that she would not have been able to provide for Gypsy otherwise. And then on top of it, she's getting $1,200 a month from Rod, and Gypsy's 23 years old, thinking that his daughter is very, very sick and he's doing the right thing, and had no clue. And I do want to point out, I saw where he said the reason that they didn't see Gypsy is because, they moved away after Hurricane Katrina. And he said they tried to arrange several times to go see her, but for some reason or another, something fell through, and Dee Dee wouldn't come to Louisiana. So it never really worked out.
Hard to believe that this case slips through the cracks with the medical professionals and everything like that as far as it does, and eventually leads to Dee Dee's murder. Just a sad situation.
Yeah, I mean, with medical professionals, I mean, they have to base what they're doing to you based on what you tell them. And if Dee Dee's doing these things and she's making it look like Gypsy, for example, the drooling, I mean, okay. I mean, she is drooling. We can visually see that. And it's just sad. And people say, oh, well, the medical professionals failed her, the neighbors failed her, the police failed her, the social workers failed her. They did. But let's go back to who caused that. These other people didn't cause that. Dee Dee failed her daughter.
Well, and let's face it, we're ingrained as human beings to believe that particularly a parent would want nothing but good for their child. I mean, we kind of accept that at face value as people. And especially with Munchausen by proxy being such a rare thing, it's not seen very much. So a doctor who is trying to address a problem reported by a mother about a child, I mean, their default position is going to be that this mom wants the best for her daughter, right? Even though that is certainly not the case.
Yes. Like you said, I mean, it's sad. And I know this is your first time, hearing most of this case, because I've heard about it for several years, because you know how my brain works. And it's one of those cases, when I first heard it, I can still remember the shock. Like, did I just hear this right? This woman was doing this to her child. It's sad.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this week's case, and as always, we'll see you next week. We would like to hear your thoughts on this and all of our cases, and as always, you can reach us by email at truecrimeoutloud@gmail.com, Facebook and Instagram at True Crime Out Loud. Out Loud is 2 words, not one, and Twitter at TC Out Loud.
Photos, links, and sources for this case can be found on our website at www.truecrimeoutloud.com.